Hello everyone, so today we're going to be reading Abyssal Attractions, Yandere Creature X Listener Up in Here. I'm so excited to finally start the story. The author is Phantom Heart 8, and here's a summary. You are part of a deep sea science team, sent down half a mile into the ocean in an underwater base to try and find out more about the local phenomenon. However, when a strange creature with strange abilities that has never been seen before is brought in, things change, and not necessarily for the best. Ooh, interesting. Also, so far as we know, the story is complete, so yay! And I don't know if there's a book 2 to this. There might or might not be. Not too sure, but I'll find out for you guys eventually. Anyways, we is into this warning. So there will be mentions of spiders. There is a phobia for that will be on the screen at the moment. There will be mentions of dissecting not actually happening, but there is mentions of it. Then there are mentions of just a lot of yelling. There is just a lot of crying and yelling mentioned here. So it'll be kind of loud. And then there will also be mentions of venom killing someone. You guys will understand my confusion when you get into the chapters. And body control somehow. Oh, there will also be mentions of an explosion / people dying and bodies, corpses mentioned. Oof. Yeah. And there will just also be a lot of screaming here too. Just basically loud noise. If I have any more warnings that I should have mentioned, but I probably forgot because your girl's busy, they'll be on the screen right now. You guys have been warned. Chapter 1. Under the Sea. And then, before we start reading, the author wanted to let us know that they thank us for reading and that they wrote it a long time ago and this was their first story. So there's going to be some mistakes and all of that, which is fine. Makes sense. I mean, it happens. It's alright. Okay, now officially. Oh, excuse me. And they also wanted to let us know, for the story ahead, the Yandere likes to address the YN by the nickname Polyp. When he says this, he's referring to the polyps that make up coral, not the other kind of polyp. There has been okay. I hope I'm saying it right though. Polyp. But that's basically the nickname the monster might get for us. Okay. Alright. Okay. Now, officially. You walk down one of the hallways of the base, the metal grating and clinging when your shoes made contact with it. You were on your way to the main lab to give your report on some local fish to the lab's head scientist. You had been in this underwater establishment for about a month now, and to be honest, you were loving it. You did miss your family and all, but this was such an exciting experience for you. I mean, how many people are able to go half a mile down into the ocean in one of the first few ocean labs ever? It was a chance that you wouldn't pass up. You, along with 5 other people, were chosen to go down to study some of the local phenomena. Fauna? Is it I'm going to say fauna. Hopefully I'm saying it right. You were brought down there for your study in animal behavior and health. Maria, a girl about 22, was there for basically the same reason as you accept for floral life. Jack was a technician. Hubert was the guy who went out and brought everything in. Paul was your guys' doctor. And finally, Robert was the head of the lab. To you, it felt like he worked with everything. Anyway, back to the present. You got down to the lab at the end of the hallway and entered the brightly lit lab. The walls were white, which added to the brightness, making you have to squint your eyes to adjust to them. There were counters with lab equipment everywhere, too. Only Robert was in the room. That was understandable considering it was the end of the day and everyone else was probably in the cafeteria for dinner. Robert was an older man, about in his mid-40s. He had dark brown hair that was balding in the middle with a few stripes running across it. He had large round spectacles that sat in front of his eyes and always seemed to have a disapproving scowl. He was fairly tall, but very stick-like and muscle mass. Basically, he was a cliche science professor. You walked in front of his chair, but he did not look up at you or even acknowledge that you were there any way, shape, or form. You stood there awkwardly for a few seconds before clearing out your throat. He took his eyes off the paper he was reading, but did not look up at you. What? He demanded rather harshly. That was it? You didn't even get a hello? Who the heck spit in his microscope lens? Oh well, that was normal behavior for Robert anyway. You ran a hand through your hair and opened your mouth to speak. I got the report on the fish Hubert found out by the caves 20 meters below the lab, sir. You said, as you handed him the papers to him. You didn't really like him, so the only reason you called him sir was out of respect for him being older than you. He took the papers and read them over for a second. You continue to speak, though. From what I have gathered from them, they like to stick together in schools of about 10 to 15, and they also have special fins for what I hypothesized they used for you were cut off before you could continue. Miss Wyan, what was your assignment? You stood there blankly for a second. Why was he asking this? He had the assignment right there in his hands. You just told it to him, in fact. Sir? You said a bit hesitantly. Not sure where he was going with this. He growled a little bit before straightening in his chair and looking at you. I said, what was your assignment? He said again, although this time a little tested for patience. To give you the report on this type of fish we discovered, sir. You said, in all honesty, you just wanted to go and have dinner with your friends and then go to bed. It has been quite the day for you, and Robert wasn't helping. He never did. Precisely, Miss Wyan. He stated, just a report. If I was wanting you to give me a presentation, then I would have called everyone to the meeting room so everyone could play show and tell. You mentally rolled your eyes. You really did not like Robert. And you have given me the report, so I suggest you go to the cafeteria, get dinner, and then go to bed instead of wasting my time in here. I'm a very busy man, and if you cannot respect that, then I will find someone else more professional to do your job. Have I made myself clear? Dear Lord, you really hated this man. You couldn't help but feel rage build up inside of you, but you had to keep your cool. You knew Robert would very well go through what he just threatened to do so. Yes, sir, very clear. You just barely managed to keep your anger out of your voice. Good. Now off with you. He sat back in his chair and continued to read through the report. Jesus, who shoved a stick so far up his... Who? My goodness, bro. You took that as your chance and immediately stormed out of the lab. Why was that man so darn stuck up? The world may never know. Some mysteries just go unsolved now, don't they? You made it down to the hallway just in time, turning to where the cafeteria was. As you walked in, mumbling under your breath about all the things you wanted to say to Robert's arrogant face, you entered the cafeteria only to find it empty except for one other person. And guess freaking what? It was the other flippin' person you did not get along with. You really were just having a day. Maybe I could just skip dinner and just go to bed, you thought to yourself. Maria looked up from the food she was eating and scowled at you. It actually kind of sucked, really. You were hoping to get along with the only other female down here, but I guess that things don't always go as planned. And the thing is that you never actually did anything to her. It was just like everything you did offended her, no matter what. Maybe it was the fact that you were only 19. Maria was about medium-sized with shoulder-length brown hair with sausage rolls on the ends. She had hazel eyes that only seemed to ever be filled with disgust. She had on the usual lab coat with a light blue shirt underneath, bright pink leggings, and white slippers to go with the rest of her attire. You quietly sighed before going around to the food counter to make yourself some dinner. So, you started up slowly. You could just feel the eye roll Maria was giving you. Where's everyone else? You said as you turned around to her as you waited for your food to heat up. She wiped her lips on the napkin before glaring up at you. Gosh, you were on a roll on pissing people off today. It was like your existence just offended them. Whatever. That was a fault in their eyes. If you must know, they're in the meeting room. I would have thought you could have figured that out by yourself, and don't you know it's poor etiquette to talk to someone while they're eating? You widened your eyes and slowly turned around back to your food, muttering a small apology. She just scoffed at your back and continued eating her meal. I hope she chokes on that. You were not going to deal with this while you ate. You've already had it with Robert. You were not going to take Maria's crap too. Once your dinner was heated enough, you grabbed it and walked out of the cafeteria to the meeting hall. As you entered, you looked around and saw Jack, Hubert, and Paul sitting around at the main table with a whole bunch of papers and dice. Oh goodness, they were playing Dungeons and Dragons again. The meeting room had 2 layers to it. It really was only a step down to a smaller area. There were just relaxing couches everywhere and a television depicting the wildlife outside of the lab on one of the walls. You sat down next to Hubert and started to eat while they role-played their characters. From the midst of it, you knew that Jack was the dungeon master, Paul was some type of warrior, and Hubert was some kind of sneaky dude. If you remembered correctly, they were called rogues. Hubert was a guy about age 24 with a sort of pale skin tone, short, spiky black hair sat atop his head, and he had the darkest colored eyes you'd ever seen. They were just a dark brown but it did not look like he had any pupils. That kind of reminds me of my eyes, honestly. Jack was about 30 years old. He was Mexican. He had an umber brown skin tone with dark brown eyes. He also had a little mustache going on too. Paul was 65 with a red face and white hair. He was always happy though, so you really liked him. Hubert looked up at you and smiled. You smiled back. Bad day, huh? How'd you tell? You have that look on your face. He winked at you and turned back towards his papers while Jack laughed a little and shook his head unknowingly at you. Paul chuckled at himself, the wrinkles on his face becoming more prominent as he did. These were your friends. The way to counter Robert's and Maria's harsh words. You were really glad that they were the ones that came down with you. You probably wouldn't survive if you had to deal with a whole bunch of Roberts and Marias. You know, you should play with us, Paul said from across the table, and Jack and Hubert nodded in agreement. You continued chewing your pasta for a second before you swallowed and answered them. Nah, I have just as much fun watching you guys play. You smiled and winked back at Hubert before continuing to eat. Hubert chuckled at you before going back to the game. It was fun to watch them. It really was. Watching Jack throw all sorts of monsters at them and Hubert and Paul trying to counter them with dice rolls. We especially loved it when Hubert would roll a 1 and fumble because then he would swear like he just stubbed his pinky toe on the corner of the coffee table, and it happened a lot. You smiled even though you still had to deal with Maria and Robert. At least you had these 3. They were your friends. And with them, they're with you. Everything would be alright. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Very interesting. My tongue kind of caught in some of the words. Alright, we is in chapter 2. A curious find. You had just barely finished the pasta on your plate when something in Hubert's pocket started beeping. Everyone paused and looked over at him. He swore under his breath before rummaging through his pocket and pulling out some sort of watch. After a second, he looked up at everyone. "Sorry, but we're gonna have to continue this later. I just got called into duty," he said before standing up with a groan and making his way towards the door. "Right now?" you replied, looking over at Jack and Paul. "Yeah, Robert wants me out tonight to see if I can find any special creatures that only come out during the night. He also wants us to get some deeper water firms for Maria," Hubert said, looking back at you guys. "I think the word you're looking for is nocturnal, Hubert," Jack said with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Hubert just scoffed at him and continued out the door. "Wait," you called. "I'll help you suit up." You shot up from the couch and ran after him. You both continued down the hall for a little bit. Sometimes, going through glass walkways where you could see the water and ocean life outside, there was very little light left. After a while, the two of you entered a circular brown room with enough room to fill a big group of people. You didn't know why there was only 6 of you down here on a really important mission such as this. But hey, at least you had been one of the 6 people chosen, so you couldn't complain. The room smelled a lot like seaweed, and every step you took echoed a little. Hubert walked over to where the suits were hanging and started to get himself ready. You walked over, assisting him on putting it on. It was halfway on whenever you started talking again. "Is it scary down there? All by yourself? Are you ever worried?" He looked up at your question. And he smirked a little bit. "Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's creepy, especially on night missions like this. And sometimes I worry because most of the time I'm the only one out there. Although every now and then Jack will come out on a mission with me. I know he knows how the suits works too. He knows how to work the suits too. But isn't he the one to lure you down and bring you back up when you're done?" you asked, a little concerned for him. "Yeah, well, but Paul's know how to do it too, so when Jack and I go, he's the one who lures us and brings us back in," he said, giving you a comforting smile. "Well, that's good to know," you said, a little relieved. You continued helping him put on his suit. It was a special suit specifically designed for his type of missions. It had a lot of tools that came with it just in case he needed to cut or drill something, probably to get flora from Maria. It also possessed special holding equipment so he could bring back specimens back to the base, so he could do research on them. It was designed to not harm whatever it was holding, and so the animals were safe inside the containers. None of the specimens were harmed at the base. All of the animals that were brought in were studied by examination, and some cells were taken from them. When they were tagged and set free again. It was against protocol at the moment to dissect any of them. You helped Hubert get his air tank settled in and made sure everything was connected and ready for him to submerge. As he was putting his helmet on, Jack walked through the door. He walked over to a control panel that was the one at the end of the room and waited until Hubert was ready. You walked over to the stand next to Jack as Hubert gave himself one final check over. You were curious to see how it worked, so maybe you could help them out with it sometime in the future. Hubert stood straight and gave Jack a thumbs up. Jack looked down at the panel, his brown eyes scanning over it as he flipped switches and pressed buttons. After a few seconds, he pulled a lever down. "All right, down you go," Jack said, looking up. The floor started to slightly vibrate, and after a few seconds, the middle section of the room started to lower down. "Be safe," you called after him as he slowly descended into the water. He gave you a smile through his helmet, and that was the last you saw of him as he descended into the water. After a second, you heard his voice speak through the staticky intercom that he was on. You watched what Jack did as he pressed more buttons and pushed the lever back up. The floor started to vibrate again as the floor loudly lifted back into place. "He'll be fine." Jack gave you a reassuring smile. "Remember, he has been doing this every day for a month. and we had had no problems so far. You smiled back at him and looked back down at the floor where Hubert had gone through. Come on, let's get back to the main room, Jack said, patting you on the back. He smiled and nodded, following after him as he started to walk down the hallways again. You didn't have to worry about not seeing anything, because most of the halls had bright lights that were never turned off, and also had white walls that added to the brightness. How long is he usually out for? You asked, looking up at Jack. About... He paused. 2 hours usually. 3 if he's not having lots of luck. You nodded in response to that and re-entered the main room. Paul was gone. Probably go make sure everything was put up in the medical room, and then go to bed. Which in that case, you weren't too far behind. You stared into the TV screen, dissecting the areas outside the base, watching all of the fish swim past. You loved looking into the fauna go on with their lives. Every now and then, you could see sea turtles, sharks, and even a whale on one occasion. You loved working with and studying animals in general. That's one of the reasons why you were so honored to be chosen for one of the first people to be on this base. There would be more soon, of this you had no doubt. You were just glad you had Jack, Hubert, and Paul to keep you company. Or else you might have gone insane while being stuck down here with people like Robert and Maria. You had trained and studied so hard to be included in this. You spent long nights during college working to give yourself more knowledge, so you didn't want this experience to be ruined by those two. You didn't know how long you laid on the couch, watching the sea life, but when you finally snapped out of your haze, Jack was gone and the main room was eerily quiet. Now that you thought about it, you recalled Jack saying goodnight to you. He probably went to his room to wait for Hubert to be done. You guardedly got up from your comfortable position on the couch and walked out of the main room. You walked down the halls leading to your room, passing everyone else's room on the way. You wanted to get to your room as soon as possible. You were tired and the light from the hallways was really hurting your eyes. You finally made it to your room, being careful not to slam the door and wake up Maria, who was your closest neighbor. If you did, you would never hear the end of it. And you really did not need that. You got dressed in your bed attire and lay down on your bed after shutting off the lights. It only took a moment before you were sound asleep. Oh goodness. You didn't know how long you were asleep before you heard a pounding knock on your door. The sound caused you to shoot up? Excuse me. The sound caused you to bolt up in a startle. You rubbed your eyes as you got up and made your way to the door. You cracked it open, wincing at the sharp hall lights as they stung your eyes. You looked up to see who woke you up. It was Robert. Wyatt, we need you in the lab room immediately, he said in a hurried voice. All right, I'll be there, you said softly, shutting the door and starting to change into your lab gear again. After you had finished changing your attire, you hurried out of your room and down the hall on the way to the lab room. Your feet slamming against the metal gratings as you jogged down the hallway. You slowed down as you entered the lab room. Robert, of course, was there, so was Hubert and Jack. Maria and Paul were not present, so you assumed they either didn't arrive yet or they were still sleeping. You rubbed a hand through your hair, straightening it as you made your way to where the 3 men were looking into a glass container. What's going on? You asked, coming to a stand beside Hubert. He looked down at you with his tired-looking eyes. I found something new, he said, and Dr. Robert says he never seen anything like it. Your eyes widened in surprise at his words. Never seen anything like it. But Robert knew almost everything that came down through here. And if he didn't know, he usually knew. If he didn't know something, he usually knew something like it. Gulping, you looked down. It's probably like a weird-ass tech something. I don't know. Alright, this is chapter 3. Hoolan. In all honesty, it looked like some form of a sea spider. It had long, pale, spindly legs, 2 sharp hooked mandibles, and 2 little round black eyes that stared beadily back up at you. It was about the size of your hand, It moved around the glass tank as it was held in and every now and then snapped its mandibles at the four of you. You were at a loss for words. It looked like something you could find at this depth and area. So how come Robert didn't know anything about it? You looked back up at Robert with a confused expression. You knew for a fact that he knew about creatures like this. You had seen them in his files. I don't understand. It looks like some type of sea spider, although I will admit, it is kind of exotic looking, you said, looking into Robert's hazel-colored eyes. I thought the same thing, too. He responded after a moment. But then I was putting some food into the tank and, well, it might be better if I showed you. He straightened his glasses and grabbed some tweezers, pinching some chunks of meat in them. He looked back at Hubert with a confused expression. He only gave a bewildered one in return. You then turned, meeting gazes with Jack, who looked just as confused as you were and giving you a shrug. You turned back to Robert as he removed the top of the tank off and held the tweezers into the tank with the meat just barely being in the water itself. The sea spider looking thing bent its legs, spreading its body to the bottom of the tank with a threatening stance, its beady black eyes staring wearily at the tweezers. For a long, quiet moment, nothing happened. Just the four of you staring down at the creature in absolute silence. You didn't know what to think, partially because you didn't really know what was going on. It just stood at the bottom of the tank, doing nothing. After another moment, Robert put it in further, but only about an inch. You stared at the creature, waiting to see what it had done to put Robert and Hubert in such a fuss. You opened your mouth to say something when the creature's mandibles shot forward, extending from its body to the top of the tank and snatching the meat from the tweezers. It happened so fast that you jumped back a little, looking down in fright as the fangs retracted back to the body and the thing started to devour the meat. Now you knew what Hubert and Robert meant. It was not something you had seen in any sea creature or animal, for that matter, do. There was a possibility that it could still be a type of sea spider that had different evolutionary functions than most other sea spiders. But that still didn't shake off of how weird and scary that you just saw. The creature's body itself hadn't even moved. It was all just the fangs. The tweezers had to have been a foot above its body. This was something that was definitely not seen before. You stared down at the creature for a moment, watching its mandibles twitch to get the meat into its mouth, all the while giving you a dark, warning gaze. You looked back up into Robert's eyes, having the same wide-eyed expression not only him, but Hubert and Jack as well. You glanced back into the tank before quickly looking back to Robert. I have no idea what to say, you said, looking around at the other three, lost. What do we do? Robert pounded at your question for a moment before standing up a little straighter. First, I want you to go to bed so you can be well rested in the morning to do some research on this little guy. Same for the both of you men. I want everyone to get well rested for the big day we have tomorrow. I will clean up the lab and make sure the specimen is thoroughly contained. Now off to bed with all of you, YN. I want to see you here first thing in the morning. Yes, sir, you replied, taking one last look at the thing before turning around and slowly making your way to the door and to the hallway beyond. Jack and Hubert following behind with the same speed as you. You were only a little down the hallway when Jack started speaking. My goodness, I don't have a clue to what the hell just happened. I mean, have you ever seen a crab do something like that before? He stated, obviously a little freaked out. If that thing is even a crab or any type of animal that is discovered for that matter, Hubert said, looking overly tired. You wanted to ask him how and where he found it, but decided to do that in the morning since he looked about just ready to pass out where he stood. It must be tiring going out in that suit for a couple of hours. You all said goodnight to each other and made your way to your rooms. You slid back inside your room, closing the door quietly again. You had no idea what time it was, nor did you really want to know. You slowly changed back into your sleeping gear, making sure your alarm was set for the right time, and switched off the lights, crawling into your bed. You laid your head down on your pillow, but did not close your eyes yet. Yes, you were tired, but you were also excited to see what this creature was and what it could do. What is a type of sea spider? Was it a type of sea spider or something that has never been seen before? You guessed you would find out soon, though. So with that in your head, you closed your eyes and waited for sleep to drag you into its clutches. For a long while, you had just laid there with your eyes closed, thinking about the new find. However, you eventually felt the grasp of sleep creeping its way into your eyes, and finally you fell asleep, dreaming of swimming through the ocean outside of the base. You didn't have any gear on, but you were breathing just fine. You approached a little cave of the seafloor and saw a little pale sea spider-like creature. Interesting. The blaring sound of your alarm snapped you out of your dream world and back into reality. You sleepily rubbed your tired eyes and yawned. Then, your breath froze in your throat as you quickly leapt out of your bed to change into your lab gear and to get ready for the day. Today was the day you would be working and studying the new creature. You ran a brush through your hair to get the snarls out of it and slipping into your lab attire and heading out to the door. You were excited to get to work, but you wanted to get some breakfast first to start your day. You walked into the cafeteria to find it empty. Everyone else was still asleep. The only people who were awake at the moment were you and Robert. You quickly ate a small bowl of cereal before heading out into the hall and towards the main lab. You fast walked down the hall, trying to get there as quickly as possible. You finally made it to the lab, entering through the door to find literally everyone there. You stopped for a second, not expecting to have seen anybody but Robert and maybe Maria before noon. They were all crowded around the new specimens tank, but you couldn't see because their backs were blocking your view. You walked around them to stand on the other side of the tank. You said good morning to all of them, to which only Paul, Jack, and Hubert replied with another good morning. Robert had a clipboard and papers in his hands. Looking down at whatever it was saying with a scowl. Maria looked over his shoulder and at the papers, neither of them acknowledging you for a moment. You walked over to stand next to Hubert, who smiled down at you with a warm grin. "How'd you sleep, Wyan?" he asked politely, reaching out and to gently rub your shoulder. "I slept okay. What about you?" You replied, looking up at him. He gave a thumbs up in return and opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could utter a sound, Robert spoke. "Wyan, I need you to go over with... Wyan, I need you to... Excuse me. Wyan, I need to go over with you what we will be doing today." You looked over at him for a second and then back at Hubert. He gave you a lopsided smile and moved over so that you could stand next to Robert. Maria moved away as you did, and you were glad she did. You didn't need her scathing gaze over you as you spoke with Robert. You went over with Robert what he wanted you to do with a new specimen over the course of the next few days. It included what he wanted you to look at and what he wanted you to do to see how it reacted, which brought a question out of your lips. "Did you find anything new about it?" you asked. He paused for a second, but by the look he had, it was not to decide what to tell you and what not to tell you, but how to describe it. After a moment, he opened his mouth again and spoke. "I don't know how to describe it, YN. The best thing I can come up with at the moment is that it adapts." You tilted your head in confusion at his words, not quite getting what he meant. He blew out a puff of air before he continued to speak. "I haven't learned too much, but it seems that it quickly adapts to wherever it is. For instance, it came in this morning, and it had a new feature that it didn't have last night." You widened your eyes at his words. "A new feature? What did he mean by that?" "Like what?" you asked. "It had hooks on its legs, YN. Hooks specifically designed to help it climb glass." "What?" you exclaimed, quickly turning around to look back into the tank. It was true. The creature had little black hooks on the end of its legs that it used to climb the glass of its tank. It didn't have those last night. You knew it that it hadn't. You now know why Robert wanted you to go through what he told you to go through with it. He wanted to see if it would form anything else new. You stared down at the little creature in amazement. This was going to be an amazing specimen to learn from. You walked over to the edge of the tank to peer down at it. It stared up at you with its little round black eyes, and even though it didn't have any way to show emotion through its eyes, you could tell how it was feeling, how he was feeling. You didn't know but how you could tell that it was a male, but it was almost like it was telling you with its eyes. What are we going to call him? You asked with the others. You heard Maria scoff behind you when you turned back to look at her. You don't even know if it's male yet, YN. You gave her a fierce glare in return. You were almost at your patience end with her. I just know, you replied back, still giving her the glare. That's not very professional, she replied, squinting her eyes at you. You gave her a harder glare in return and looked back over to Robert, who looked up from the papers he was looking at. Hubert found him, so he can name him, Robert replied before looking back down at his papers. At that, you turned to look at Hubert, wanting to know what he would name the little creature. He looked lost in thought for a second before grinning and turning his head to look over at you. You can go ahead, YN. You'll do a better job at naming him than I will. You couldn't believe what he just said. You were absolutely ecstatic now. He looked down at the little creature again, thinking on what to name him. He was on the side of the terrarium, still looking at you. After a minute, you smiled and looked back up at everyone. Hoolan, you said. Jack and Paul chuckled a little while Maria scoffed. Robert started to walk off to a different part of the lab, and Hubert just smiled down at you. What made you come up with that name? He asked. I don't know, you replied. It just sounds fitting for him. Plus, it's a funky-sounding name, like for a funky-looking dude. He laughed at your reply until you heard Robert shouting at everyone to get back to work. As everyone walked out, you leaned back down so you could look into Hoolan's eyes. Hello, Hoolan. My name's YN. I promise to treat you with all the care and respect you deserve. You smiled at him. I hope you and I can be really good friends. That is so cute. I'm so sorry. That is so cute. Alright, LB is in Chapter 4, Best of Friends. Over the course of a week and a half, you spent nearly all of your time with Hoolan. You spent time examining him and talking to him. He was by far one of the smartest and most unusual creatures you had ever seen in your life. Robert was right when he said that Hoolan was able to adapt to any area it was put in. In fact, the fastest you had seen him change was only a matter of seconds. You had first seen this after you had decided to put some things on his tank to make it seem more like home. You asked Hubert to pick up some sand, rocks, and plants from the area he found Hoolan. You didn't want him to be stuck in a plain tank for God knows how long. You wanted him to be comfortable. One of the first significant changes you had witnessed was when one of the small feeding fish he was given swam into a makeshift tunnel so he couldn't get his legs through. So he started to dig. However, that was not significant about it. My English. However, that's not what was significant about it. What made it astonishing was that his two front legs shaped themselves into little shovels like appendages, and he dug from there. That was not the only thing that he had done either. There seemed to be no end to the surprises that Hoolan held in his body. You had seen him on multiple occasions, and his legs elongating, making him taller, his legs shaped into various forms to help him with whatever he was doing. He even broke through the glass on one occasion and had to be transferred to a tank made of reinforced glass. The most bizarre thing that he had done so far, however, happened to be the 10th day of him being at the base. You entered the lab in the morning after having breakfast with Paul and Hubert, only to find that your find of a lifetime was gone. You panicked and at first looking at the tank from almost every angle possible to make sure he wasn't just hiding. To your relief, you still found him in the tank, but to your amazement, you found that he had changed in size. He was no longer the size of your hand, but the size of a quarter. The size change absolutely amazed you, but how drastic the change had to be stupendous. Yeah, and Again, to your amazement, the very next day he was back to the regular size. The day after that he changed sizes again, but this time he was bigger than your hand. He was the size of a dinner plate. One of the many benefits of having Hoolan around was that Robert treated you better than he did before, and Paul, Hubert, and Jack would come in every now and then to take a look at Hoolan. Maria thought that he was way too freaky and often kept her distance, which you were very grateful for. Now that the many things you discovered about your new friend, some are actually genuinely scary. Granted, it was all kinds of scary, but some aspects more than others. For instance, one day Robert was able to confiscate some of the feeding fish from Hoolan and discover that Hoolan was paralyzing his prey with a strange sort of venom. Not only he had venom, however, but 3 types of it that had been discovered so far. One venom was the why can I say this right? Paralysis venom. Another one was that one of the other ones was the melted flesh of whatever was introduced to it, and a third was a venom that just outright killed his prey. You didn't know why, but that honestly scared the ever-living crap out of you, and you knew that you only scratched the surface on what Hoolan could do. Now back onto the present day. You had Jack design a toy for Hoolan because you were sure that for a creature as smart as he was probably bored in his tank. The toy was a little container that held some feeding fish in it. You would hide it around the tank so Hoolan would have to search for it. Once he found it, he would have to find a way to open it so he could have the fish inside. You were sitting in the lab watching Hoolan try to figure out getting his meal out of the container when Hubert walked into the lab with one of his hands behind his back. He had a shy grin on his face too, which was something you had never seen on him before. "Hey Hubert, what's up?" you asked him, glancing at him before returning your gaze back to Hoolan, who by now had gotten the container open and was munching on fish. "Nothing much, I just wanted to stop by and see how you were doing. I'm kind of sad because I don't see you as much anymore, although I totally get why though," he replied, a little bit of sorrow in his voice. You turned over to him to see him extending a flower in your direction. "Where did you get this?" you asked him as you took it from him and examined it. It was red, with small petal-like things. "I stole it from Maria," he said. You widened your eyes at his words, but then furrowed them when he started laughing. "Not really. I picked it up for one of my missions," he replied, looking down at you with a small smile. "Oh, thank you, Hubert. It's beautiful," you said, caressing its red petals. "I was wondering when." His demeanor suddenly changed from playful to bashful. If you wanted to hang out with me in the common room, just you and me this evening." At that, you snapped your attention back to him. He had his hands in his pockets and was looking shyly down at the floor. You didn't know what to think. You never hung out with just Hubert before. Plus, you had to tend to Hoolan. I don't know, Hubert. I have to watch Hoolan," you said, looking up at him. You could practically see him deflate, which made you want to say something to comfort him, but you didn't know what. "Oh, okay, just let me know if you want to. I'll just be in the common room if you change your mind." And with that, he turned away, and you could hear him sigh before the doors closed behind him. Gosh dang it, you didn't mean to hurt his feelings. You would like to hang out with him, you really would, but you also wanted to stay with Hoolan. Oh, sorry if y'all hear me hit the mic on accident. Oopsie. You sighed to yourself and turned back to Hoolan's tank, tracing your fingers across the glass in deep thought. After a minute of doing this, you realized that Hoolan was copying you and had one of his legs traced the glass in almost perfect sync with you. You smiled widely at that and dropped your finger to look at him. He held his leg on the glass for a second afterward before turning and heading back deeper into his tank. "What do you think, Hoolan? Should I do it?" you asked the little creature, but he only paid attention to the little hole he was digging in the sand. You looked after him while thinking about what you should do. Hoolan would be fine for a few hours. He didn't need constant attention. He would be okay. At that, you smiled and jumped out from your seat, quickly making your way to the door. "I'll be back in a little bit, Hoolan," you called after him as you made your way out of the door, heading down the halls to your room to freshen up. As you left your room, you didn't notice a little particular creature had stopped what he was doing and stared after where you had been for a long while after you left. You took in a deep breath standing in front of the door to the common room. You had taken a shower and changed out of your lab attire and was now about to enter the room to hang out with Hubert. After another breath, you finally summoned the courage and walked through the doors into the common room. Hubert looked up from where he was sitting with a surprised look on his face that quickly turned into a big smile. "Why, and you came!" he exclaimed. You smiled back at him. "I figured Hoolan would be fine for a couple of hours, and besides, I miss seeing you as much, too." A slow blush came to his cheeks at your words, and he himself seemed at loss for words. Spending those few hours in the commons room was some of the best time of your life. Why am I saying this so wrong? I'm so sorry. Spending those few hours in the commons room was some of the best time of your life. You two literally did whatever came your way, and all the worries about Hoolan was banished from your mind. There wasn't a whole lot to do in the common room, but maybe that's why it was such a good time, because it was so simple, yet so special to the both of you. You talked for hours on end, and every now and then went back to the cafeteria to get some drinks and snacks. Hubert was quite the jokester, but wasn't rude in any way. You wondered why no one else had walked in on you guys yet, and figured that Hubert had asked them if they would vacate the common room for a few hours. You knew Jack and Paul would grant Hubert's wish, but you were surprised that Robert and Maria did too. You two were just getting onto the topic of your families when Paul burst through the door saying that Robert needed you in the lab immediately. All the worries about Hoolan suddenly resurfaced. What happened? Did he get out? You jumped up as grabbing Hubert's hand and pulling him with you as you three ran down the hall to the lab. The three of you burst through the doors to find Robert, Jack, and Maria in the room. You looked over to the tank to see that Hoolan was still in it. You breathed in a sigh of relief and leaned back into Hubert a little bit. He grabbed your shoulders to steady you, and you started walking over to Robert. He had a big scowl on his face, and you wondered what was going on. "What's wrong?" you asked as you approached, with Hubert at your heels. Robert let out a deep breath before looking at you. "The guys up top have been reading the reports on Hoolan. Tomorrow they're sending down a submarine to pick him up, to take him to a place where he can be better studied." You felt despair at the thought of Hoolan being taken away from you, but the pause from Robert made you a little suspicious. He wasn't giving you all the details. You gave him a hard look. "Robert, what aren't you telling me?" The whole room was silent for a moment before he said 6 words that made your heart shatter. "YN? They're going to dissect him." Even he was nervous to say it, bro. I could tell he really said, "Okay, even if I don't like this bitch, I don't want to say it." I mean, shit. Ugh. My goodness. Hey. We are in chapter 5. That's what friends do. Also, a nice tank setup. I likey. I likey this. I likey. Are you sure those are steady enough for the tank? I mean, as long as it's like, it can hold a heavy ass tank, Good for you. Good for you. But anyways. What? You nearly shrieked out at Robert. From the corner of your eye, you saw Jack flinch out from your outburst, but that didn't matter at the moment. "They can't do that!" you yelled to Robert, who was giving you a pitying expression. "Hoolan is one of the most special creatures that has ever been discovered. They can't just kill him. What if he's the last of his kind? They can't do that." Robert opened his mouth to reply, but someone else beat him to it. "They can, and they will, YN." You turned with wide eyes to see who the person was that spoke. It was Maria. She was giving you a hard look, and her head tilted up a little bit with her hip jutted out. "There's nothing you can do about it, YN. Besides, it's just an animal. There's plenty of more in the ocean." She rolled her eyes as she spoke to you in her usual sarcastic voice. You gritted your teeth as tears started to roll down your cheeks. The tears felt hot against your eyes and cheeks. How could she say something like that? Didn't she know how much Hoolan meant to you? Oh, she did all right. She just didn't care. You lunged over at her and grabbed her by the collar of her lab coat and shoved her against the wall. She let out a little scream as you did, and you heard Jack, Paul, and Hubert yell your name as Robert yelled for you to stop. How could you say that? You yelled in her face. That's like saying if you drowned, it's okay because there's plenty of other people on the planet. You would have yelled more at her, but you felt something pulling you off and away from her. Robert stepped between you and Maria as you struggled in Hubert's grip. As you did, a tapping sound filled the room. That is enough, YN. I don't agree with it either, but there is nothing we can do about it, he shouted. Then continued, his voice lowering a little. They are going to be here tomorrow to get him, so I suggest you make peace with the fact that what's going to happen. You ripped yourself from Hubert's grip and looked between your three friends. Paul and Jack were both looking away from you with sad expressions. So you turned to Hubert for help. He had himself a sad expression and even had his mouth open to try to say something, but nothing came out. Eventually, he just closed his mouth and gave you an even sadder expression before looking down at the ground. It felt like your heart was being ripped to shreds right there. Your legs and hands were shaking from anger and sadness. You looked over at Hoolan's tank to find him tapping the glass with one of his hooked forelegs. The sight broke your heart even more than it already was. You looked between everyone one final time before turning around and running from the lab. You heard Hubert, Jack, and Robert call after you, but you didn't stop. You heard the footsteps of someone racing after you, but you ignored them. You eventually reached your room, slammed the door shut behind you after you entered. After a second, you heard the footsteps stop at your door, and Hubert's voice as he knocked furiously. "Wine, come out, please, we can talk about this," he said, his voice muffled a little bit as he spoke through the door. "Go away," you shouted back, but quickly regretted yelling at him. It wasn't his fault. You walked over to the door and opened it a sliver, not wanting to reveal all of your tear-struck face to him. He was breathing a little heavy as he looked through the door at you, his hands on both sides of the door. "I'm sorry for yelling at you, Hubert. It's not your fault, and I know you're here just try to help. Here, come in." You opened the door wider for him and moved it to the side so he can slip in. He moved over to the center of your room before turning back to look at you. He held out his arms for you and you slipped into them. You and him just stood there for a few minutes hugging each other. You started to cry into his chest as he started to rock you back and forth, shushing you gently. After a few more minutes, you pulled away from him, sniffling and wiping at the sleeve of your lap jacket. "Thank you for being here for me, Hubert. You are a good friend." You smiled at what you said and reached out to rub your shoulder. "I like you, Ryan, and I hate seeing you like this. What can I do to help?" "I wish we could do something for Hoolan," you replied, sniffling some more. "Me too, Ryan. It's not fair what they're doing to him, and it's not fair how Robert and Maria are treating you, too. She had no right to say that to you. I was honestly hoping you would punch her in the face." He chuckled, and you couldn't help but laugh with him a little bit. Her ass is probably a scaredy cat now. Yeah, I probably would have if you didn't pull me back. He laughed at your reply, then it got quiet for a little bit. You both looked into each other's eyes. You look into his dark, almost black eyes as he did into your eyes. You felt a blush rise to your cheeks. What did you do to deserve such a kind person? Your mind quickly went back to Hoolan again. He didn't deserve to die. You knew you had to do something. "I think I'm going to get some sleep. I'll probably feel better in the morning," you said. "Thank you for helping me." He nodded and you both hugged again before walking over to the door. He opened it before looking back at you. "Just let me know if you need anything, YN." You nodded at him before telling him that you would. You both said your good nights and he left as you started to pace the floor of your room, trying to figure out how you would save Hoolan. You waited until late at night, making sure everyone was asleep before slipping out of your room to make your move. You quietly made your way past everyone's rooms, down the hallways to the lab. You stepped as lightly as you could, being careful not to take to make the metal grating cling with your steps. After a few minutes of sneaking through the hallway, you finally made it to the lab. All lights were shut off except for the lights in the specimens tank. You made your way over to Hoolan's tank, not turning on the light. You found him in the front of the tank, looking at you as almost as if he expected you to come. "Don't worry, Hoolan. I'm not going to let them hurt you. I'm going to get you out of here," you said quietly to him. You put your hand on the glass in front of him, and he put both of his front legs on the glass where your hand was. You looked into his little eyes for a bit before turning to look around to look for something to carry him in. You went back to the cupboards where the transporting containers were and opened them to find that they had been cleared. "What?" you said quietly to yourself. So you searched the rest of the lab, only to come up empty-handed. You couldn't believe it. Robert must have known that you would do something like this, so he removed everything that you could use to carry Hoolan to someplace else. He even removed the small nets used to catch the little feeding fish. You swore under your breath and left the lab to go check the medical room. You found that everything that you could use to carry Hoolan had been removed from there too. Then you tried the kitchen in the last-ditch effort. The same thing had happened there too. You really didn't need this right now. You had to get Hoolan out of there now. You quietly ran back to the lab, but right at the door, you heard footsteps coming down the hall towards the lab, and with the sound of the stride, you knew it was Robert. You were about to bolt into the lab to hide when you heard a voice that didn't belong to Richard. "Hey, Robert, what are you doing up so late?" It was Hubert, and he sounded like an angel straight out of heaven. "Nothing much, just looking for YN. She's not in her room." "Oh, she was in the cafeteria with me, but she just went back to her room." Holy crap. Hubert knew you were doing something and was helping you not to get caught. He was really a good friend. "Oh," Robert was speaking again. "If that's the case, we should just let her be. She had a rough night," Robert said as you heard their footsteps going away from the lab. "Yeah, she was pretty upset, so we went to go get a bite to eat." And that was the last thing you heard as their voices faded from earshot. You sighed in relief. You should thank Hubert later. You went through the doors into the lab and went straight to Hoolan's tank, and he was in the exact same spot. You were pretty scared about what you were about to do next, but you were out of options. About what to do next, but you were out of options. After all, you couldn't lift the tank. You lifted the cover of the tank off and hesitated for a second before sticking your hand into the water. Hoolan got in a threatening stance and snapped his mandibles at you. You quickly pulled your hand out of the water. "Come on, Hoolan," you said desperately. You kneeled down so you could be at eye level with him. "Hoolan, you need to listen to me. I know you can understand me. I know you could from the day we first met. I can't carry you in anything else but my hands, so I really need you to cooperate with me right now. Because if you don't, I can't get you out of here. And there are bad people coming. If you're still here by then, they're going to kill you. So please let me help you, Hoolan." You look at him for a little bit before he started to do something. He started to shrink. He was now the size of your hand again. You took that as a sign and stuck your hand back into the water again. This time, he got onto your hand. It felt weird, but you were too happy to care. "Thank you, Hoolan," you said to him before turning around and making your way out of the lab. You headed through the halls to the loading room where Hubert was set off every day. You reached the room after a few minutes and immediately headed to the panel. You stood in front of it for a moment, trying to remember how Jack did it. After a while, you remembered what to do and flipped the switches and pushed the buttons necessary before pulling down the lever. The room started to vibrate loudly and you cringed. You hoped you didn't draw any unwanted attention. You quickly made your way over to the part of the floor that was lowering down, and you got on your knees and looked down at Hoolan with a sad smile. "All right, Hoolan. This is where you get off. I'm so glad to have met you. Thank you for coming into my life. I'm going to miss you so much." You had tears streaming down your cheeks by the time you were done talking. The little creature looked back up at you, his mandibles moving softly. You continued to smile at him as you lowered him into the water. "Take care, Hoolan." You cringed softly at his image as his image was blurred into the water, but he didn't get off your hand. Come on, Hoolan, you need to go. Your heart was slowly breaking again. You shook your hand gently, shaking the little creature off of your hand. You cried even harder as his image grew smaller before the water cut off your view of him. Goodbye, Hoolan. You started to cry harder as you went back up to the panel and did what you needed to do to lift the platform back up again. After lifted up and set into place, you walked over to the door to go back to your room. You were surprised when you almost crashed into Hubert's chest. He didn't say anything, but quickly pulled you into a hug. You embraced his hug and cried softly into his chest. Thank you for having my back out there, you said into his chest. I knew you were going to do something like that, he replied, so I knew I had to help you. You pulled away from him and smiled up at him. All right. Although they're gonna know it was you, they're not gonna keep you here anymore, he said with a frown on his face. You sniffled and nodded. I know, but it was worth it, though. I couldn't let them kill him. I had to help him because that's what friends do, you said, looking up into his dark eyes. But still, thank you for helping me. Excuse me, for helping him. You smiled up at him. He returned that smile. That's what friends do, he said back. Your smile grew wider at that, and you grabbed his hand, and you both head back towards your rooms. That is so cute, man. That is fucking adorable. It's so sad, man. I'm here tearing up because it's so cute. Sad moments. Sad moments up in this bitch. Trying to make me tear up around here. How is this fair? This is not good for my mental health. Oh my god. Oh my god. Not good for my mental health. We are in chapter 6. Stay together. You stood in the lab room waiting quietly as Robert practically screamed at you. He had come in this morning to get Hoolan ready for boarding, only to find the little creature gone. He immediately sent out for you and demanded an explanation. Hubert tried to stick up for you and saying that Hoolan was probably just shrunk down. You were grateful for his help, but Robert cleared out the entire tank afterward, and when he found nothing, you knew that there was no way you could get out of this one. So there you stood in the center of the lab with Robert furiously pacing around you and scolding you as if you were a little child. You stood calm and tall, keeping your face emotionless as you stared ahead. You didn't bother to try and say anything. You knew Robert would just cut you off and command you even harder. He yelled at you about how what you did was terrible and how you not only have lost your job but costed everyone else's theirs too. How it could be seen as someone helped you, or it was bad on their parts that you did it without them noticing, and they might as well just say goodbye to their jobs right now. He asked how you did it, but you refused to say a single word to him. Everyone else stood to the side as Robert gave you a verbal whooping. Maria, as always, was giving you a glare, although this time it was much darker. Paul looked at you with disappointment. It hurt to see him look at you that way. However, you knew what you did was right, and nothing in this world could change your mind about that. Jack looked confused, as though he didn't quite understand how he should feel. Finally, Hubert stood behind you. You couldn't see his face, but you knew that there was no malice in his expression whatsoever. Robert stopped yelling and pacing as a loud siren filled the room. Everyone knew what it meant. The submarine was here. Robert looked at you with a glare and told everyone to stay put as he went to the loading room to receive the person who would be coming aboard. After he left the room, it was deadly silent. You could feel Maria's scalding glare in the side of your head, and you knew Paul was probably giving you some sort of contempt too. You stayed in the same spot, not bothering to change your expression or move your gaze. You heard Hubert come up behind you and wrap an arm around you, rubbing your shoulder. It's gonna be okay, YN. He whispered into your ear. You turned your head slightly in the direction to acknowledge him, but still didn't say anything. After a few minutes, Robert walked back in with a tall guy wearing a science jacket and a person dressed as a general. They all walked into the room, and the general frowned when he saw the empty tank. Where is it? The man asked in a deep, gruff voice. The lab hand he had with him kept looking around, trying to soak everything in. Robert looked to the ground before looking back up and opening his mouth to speak. One of our scientists disagreed with the orders given at hand, and in the middle of the night, she snuck into the lab and set it free. What? The general shouted, making the lab hand next to him jump. Who? He shouted to Robert, his face turning into a bright shade of red. You could practically see the steam rising from his head. It was Miss Ellen, Robert said, nodding his head over to you. The general quickly snapped his head in your direction. He stomped his way over to you and stuck his face so close to yours that you could feel the hot breath coming from his nose. Do you have any idea what you have done? He shouted in your face. You took in a deep breath to keep from snapping right back at him. Yes, sir. I saved a creature that didn't need to die, and nothing you can say will make me think that I did not do the right thing. You said back to him calmly. He gritted his teeth at your reply. You do know that what you did is now considered a federal offense, right? In fact, I could put you in jail for the rest of your life for the crime you committed. With all due respect, sir. Hubert stepped in between you and the general. She was just trying to save an animal that could have well been the last of its kind. I mean, it's against our protocol to dissect creatures anyway. The speed at which the general grabbed Hubert by the shirt and flung him away was scary. The general pointed a finger at Hubert as he slammed against the wall. You shut your mouth or I'll send you to prison as well, you hear me? Hubert rubbed the back of his head as he gained his balance again. He looked like he was ready to lunge out at the man and attack him. His dark orbs looked into your orbs, and you shook your head pleadingly at him. He gave you a desperate look before nodding ever so slightly. The general continued to shout, directing his voice at everyone now. You are all lucky that I did not send you all to jail. But since you have all proven yourselves useful and competent at your jobs, you will not be replaced. For now, she's the only one who will be replaced. He pointed his fingers at you. Now, head scientist, he said, turning back to Robert, I want your men looking day and night for that creature. If he is not found in a month, then you all are getting replaced. Yes, sir, Robert replied. Good. The general said back, now come with me. I have things to discuss with you. With that, the general turned and strode through the door with his lab hand and Robert on his tail. Everything was quiet in the room again. Maria was still glaring at you, and Paul was talking back to Jack over in the far-off corners. You felt Hubert grab you by the shoulders and lead you to a different corner so you could talk without the others hearing you. You two faced each other and stared into each other's eyes for a minute. Him staring into your hues and you into his dark orbs. You're going to be okay, YN. He told you, looking at nothing but your eyes. You nodded, looking down, not finding any words to say to him at the moment. Everything was crashing down on you. You were going to be sent away from this amazing place, away from your friends, and you were probably going to go into prison. You felt a lump rising in your throat. Girl, imagine you going into prison, and then you tell him, oh yeah, they sent me to prison because I let go of a creature that might have been the last of the species because they wanted to dissect it. Imagine how much bullshit they would get in prison, and then prison would be added to other people, and then other people would get attracted to it, and be like, what? That is absolutely ridiculous. You know, the more attention it gets, the less power he gets. So, you know what I'm saying? Anyways, he said in a gentle... Wait, where are we? Okay, there we go. You felt a lump rising in your throat. All things considered, however, nothing would ever change your mind that what you did was right, and nothing would ever make you regret it. Hubert saw your expression shift into one of sorrow and tilted your head so you could look into his eyes again. Everything's gonna be alright, okay? He said in a gentle voice, tucking some of your hair behind your ear. You smiled at him this time and nodded again. Okay, you said, giving him a heartbreaking smile. You had almost cost him his job, and still he was trying to help you. Thank you, Hubert. Thank you for everything. You quickly hugged him before pulling back a heartbeat later. He smiled back down at you, and the two of you were now back to looking into each other's eyes. No words were passed between the two of you at that moment, but none was needed. Your eyes told each other everything. You didn't realize that two of you were leaning forward each other until your noses were only a few inches apart. Your lips were about to touch when the door slammed open and Robert walked back in with the general. You snapped your head in their direction, your eyes immediately landing on a pair of handcuffs in the general's hand. Well, totally everything's going to be alright. Hubert saw this too and immediately got defensive. You put a hand on his arm to stop him, though. He looked back at you with a surprise on his face. Hubert, don't do this to yourself. As you said, everything will be alright. You whispered to him. He gave you a heartbreaking look before looking down and nodding. Alright, Miss Hoolan. Come with me and let's get this over with. You went over to the general and calmly let him cuff your hands together in front of you. Maria looked pleased as she watched the scene take place. Robert and Paul looked disappointed. Jack looked sad and Hubert was seething in rage. You mouthed goodbye to Hubert as the general walked you out of the lab. You walked down a few hallways before coming into one of the glass hallways. You looked out into the water in confusion and the general swore. The submarine was swimming away. The general pulled out a communications radio and started talking rapidly into it, demanding to know an answer. The only thing that came from the radio was a static sound, so he continued to shout into it. Then, the submarine exploded. The force shook the entire base and sent you and the general flying to the ground. You heard footsteps thundering down the hall in your direction, and you felt Hubert's hands under your arms and helped you to your feet. You heard the voices of everyone else talking around you. What happened? Hubert asked into your ear as you got back onto your feet. You told him what happened and he stared at you in shock. Paul and Jack helped the general to his feet, and you looked at the debris of the submarine in the water. Maria screamed, and you almost choked at the sight of all the corpses floating in the water. Maria, stay calm! Robert shouted to her. She just continued to cry at the sight. Yeah, cry, bitch. You tore your eyes away from the gruesome scene before you faced the rest of your group. Everyone looked startled, and the general had a nasty bruise on his head forming. He must have hit it when the two of you were knocked down. The general's face was red and twisted with rage. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, a low, grating sound echoed through the hallways. You tilted your head a little and canted your head to try and figure out where the sound was coming from. Jack all of a sudden snapped his head in the direction where everyone came from. It's coming from the loading room, he said. He started to walk down the hallway. You quickly ran up to him. He looked down at you with confusion on his face. We should all stay together, you said. He nodded, and you looked back to the rest of the group. Maria was still crying. Hubert nodded at the two of you, and you walked up beside you. Paul and Robert stepped forward as well. The general looked like he wanted to object, but in the end was walking along with you guys. Pussy. No one said anything as you all made your way to the loading room. Once you got there, Jack opened the door cautiously and peered inside. He went inside for a moment, and you all slipped in behind him. Nothing looking damaged, but the lowering mantle wasn't there anymore. Panel wasn't there anymore. Somehow it had been removed, and an inky black water was left in its place. Jack went up to the control panel and pulled up the lever that would bring the panel back up. There was a grating noise again, and the metal shifted a little. However, the platform refused to rise. What's going on? Robert called over to Jack. I don't know, he replied. It's like it's stuck on something. Well, while we figure it out, how it opened and why it won't shut, can you take the handcuffs off the YN, please? Hubert said to the general. The general looked over the two of you before sighing and reaching into his back pocket for the keys. All right, but once another submarine comes, they're going right back on. He started to walk towards the both of you. What happened next was something you would never forget in your life. Suddenly, a giant spike-like appendage that looked like the leg of a spider shot out of the water and stuck the general through the heart. Screaming came behind you from Maria, Jack, and Robert as the leg lifted the general up before retracting back into the water. The water turned a deep red. Hubert grabbed you and bolted out of the door. Maria followed and still screaming. Jack and Robert were right on her tail. As Paul reached the door, he suddenly jerked back and pulled into the screaming into the water that was now flying red all over the room. Robert quickly shut the door, and you all ran down the hallway. Behind you, you could hear the sound of the door being torn apart by whatever was in the water. As you quickly were running. Why am I saying that? As you were running, the lights suddenly flared out, causing Maria to scream once more. You need to shut that bitch up. She's trying to get us caught. Ooh. I'm being so mad at her right now, and she doesn't even exist. You and Hubert held on tightly to each other, and after a minute, some dim red lights picked up. They must be the emergency lights. All right, everyone, let's head to the medical room. There's a computer there that we can send for help with, Robert said to all of you. You all wanted to get out of there before whatever took Paul and the general came and got the rest of you. You silently cry for Paul. He was your friend, and now he was gone. All you could do was hope, but whatever got him wouldn't get anyone else. Suddenly, Maria screamed and jumped away from everybody, pointing at Hubert. Everyone snapped their attention to him. You widened your eyes. There were these long, pale, spindly-like spider legs coming up over his shoulder. He must have felt him because he started thrashing and trying to pull whatever that was off to him. You ran over to him to help him, but it was a little complicated with the handcuffs still on you. The thing rose over his shoulder, and your breath caught in your throat, and you froze. It was Hoolan. Hoolan grew 2 large, wicked-looking fangs in the blink of an eye, black venom dripping from its tips, and sank into Hubert's neck. He screamed like he was on fire. "No!" You screamed, reaching for Hubert, but multiple hands grabbed you and yanked you away. You tried to fight out of the grip as Robert and Jack dragged you down the hall. As you were dragged around the corner, you heard Hubert speak. "I love you, Ryan." He then collapsed onto the mail grating floor, face first, Hoolan atop his back. You screamed and tried to fight the grips on you, but it was no use. Finally, you were dragged into the medical room and the door was slammed shut. You sank into the floor crying. "You stupid cowards! How could you leave him? We could have saved him!" You screamed at all of them. Robert knelt down in front of you, and he put his hands on your shoulder. "No, Ryan. You know there was nothing we could do for him. You know that Hoolan's venom does what Hoolan's venom does. I'm sorry." His voice cracked in the end. As much as you wanted to deny it, you knew it was true. You had firsthand seen what Hoolan's venom did to living things. You curled up in a ball on the floor and wept for your friend who you had slowly grown to love over the past month and a half. Robert sent a distress signal, and the next hour was spent sitting in silence, except yours and Maria's sobs. Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the door, a voice that you all knew too well, a voice that made you shout up straight from the floor, a voice that you never thought you would hear again. It was Hubert. He was calling for you. You could hear the hurt in his voice and the slow thud of his feet and the metal grating outside of the medical room. You bolted for the doorway and looked out through the little window that was atop the door. There he was. He was all the way down the hall, slowly making his way to the medical room while calling out your name. You immediately pulled the door open and shot down the hall, ignoring Robert screaming at you to stop. Your feet pounded on the floor as you ran down to Hubert, hot tears streaming down your face. Your heart was beating faster with every step you took. You couldn't believe it. Hubert was alive. Words could never describe how happy you were at that moment. As you got closer, you could see the bite wound on his neck more clearly. The red lighting didn't help, but it was oozing black liquid, and the blood vessels in that area were black too. Suddenly, you skidded about 10 feet from him. You suddenly skidded to a stop. Frozen in place, he stopped too, looking at you with an expression you couldn't quite read, partially because of his eyes. Hubert's eye color was brown, so dark it looked black, and you couldn't make out what iris and what was the pupil. Now his eyes were completely black, no whites. The only color was the red light reflecting off of them. The happy feelings were suddenly replaced by pure dread. "Hubert?" You whispered out in a shaky breath, your arms and legs starting to shake as well. The Chester smile slowly spreads across his face. He shook his head. You noticed that all of his teeth were sharp now as well. "No, Ryan," he said. This time his voice was more gurgle. "It's me, Hoolan." Oh my goodness. Oh my god. Oh my goodness. Oh my god. What do you even say to that? Oh my god. Damn. I don't even know what to say to that. Other than, wow. Very intense. Wow. So, what do I even ask? I don't even know what to say, bro. How to collect my thoughts there a little bit. What? How do you guys think Hoolan was able to not only control Hubert's body, but also slightly change his appearance? Like, now he, from normal teeth to sharp teeth, did he, like, I don't want to get too disgusting, but I'm, like, thinking, like, he entered into his brain, you know, or connected with him some way, somehow. Just give me your theories if you have any. That's my theory. Connected somehow, or is in his brain, you know, because he could literally be as small as a quarter, so, or even smaller probably. So I don't know. You guys let me know. You guys let me know. I don't want to go. I don't want to go too deep into it. And what do you guys think is going to happen to Wyatt? She was obviously tricked. She was tricked into getting out of the medical room. Because I knew it. As soon as he was like, Mayan, it's me. Hubert. Or something like that. I knew it wasn't him. I knew it wasn't him. I knew it. In my brain, I was like, I knew that isn't him. That is not him. So I'm here just like, wow. She got tricked real good. Wow. Wow. Anyways, I hope you guys did enjoy this. So far. The story so far. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more amazing videos, guys. I am just appalled, astonished, and interested. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Because, damn. Somebody needs to draw him. Because I'm having, like, a few ideas in my head of what Hubert/him would look like. But at the same time, I really don't. Like, it's, like, mixed. Like, I can draw, but, like, not as detailed and stuff. Because I'm not a big drawer. So, man, I'm astonished. But, oh, before I forget, I recently did post, something about an opportunity on my communities. I don't want to give the full details here because I'll be standing here reading it to you guys forever. But, basically, I'm considering, or, and letting people have the opportunity to, be like a second voice on the channel. Because I feel like it would, you know, spread out a little bit. Like, you know, we could spread our wings a little more, dip into more fandoms that we haven't dipped into. And I feel like you guys would like a change of voice sometimes, you know, of reading. And I completely understand that sometimes, but hey, your girl's here for now. But hopefully, to anyone who is interested and plus 13, will hopefully take the stance as well. I don't know. I already so far got like about 3 people interested. It doesn't matter. There are requirements though. They are on the communities. So if you guys would like, you guys will definitely have to read those requirements before considering it fully, because, you know, you got to achieve the requirements in order to be able to do it, you know what I'm saying? So if you guys are interested and read my requirements, y'all can message me through one of my social medias. The most I respond to is most likely Snapchat, because, I mean, Snapchat, maybe not too much Instagram, but I do try and keep myself updated always there. Discord, Discord's always been messy uppy with me, but I do have it just in case, because you never know. And there's some other apps as well, because I'm pretty sure you can also, like, message on TikTok as well. So if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments or reach out to me on one of my social medias. Please and thank you. You can even reach out to me on Wattpad, I think. You can. Anyways, I should really quick go. This is already like an hour. But anyways, I sadly gotta go, y'all. But please consider it if you're interested. Bye and peace.